My name is Jessica Harper, and I'm 36 years old. I've spent most of my life working as a teacher in a small town surrounded by familiar faces and routines. I grew up in a Christian home where faith was the foundation of everything, yet even with all the teachings, something always felt missing inside of me. I knew the Bible. I prayed. I went to church every Sunday. But deep down, I wrestled with questions I didn't dare to ask. It wasn't until one night, a moment I can't fully explain, that my life changed in ways I never thought possible. That night, I died. But what I saw, what I witnessed, shook me to my core. You see, I wasn't prepared for what I discovered, the shocking, terrifying truth that only 3% of Christians will ever make it to heaven. It's something no one wants to face, yet it's the truth I carry with me every day. I wasn't ready, but I had no choice but to see it, and what I saw will stay with me forever. It was a cold, windy night in early December when it happened. I was driving home after a long day at work, the kind of day where everything felt a bit off. My thoughts scattered, my focus blurry. The streets were slick with rain, and the headlights of passing cars cast eerie shadows on the wet pavement. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to shake the fatigue from my body, but it was like the weight of the world was pressing down on me. Then, out of nowhere, the car swerved. I didn't even see it coming. A flash of headlights blinded me, and before I could react, I was spinning, the sound of screeching tires and crumpling metal deafening in my ears. The world around me seemed to move in slow motion, as if everything had paused for just a moment. My heart raced, my breath caught in my chest, and I could feel the sharp sting of panic rising within me. And then, silence. The car came to a sudden stop, but I didn't feel any of it. It was as if my body had detached from everything around me. My vision blurred, and the weight of the world seemed to lift. I felt lighter. And then, everything went dark. I wasn't just unconscious. I was gone. When I opened my eyes, it wasn't the comforting glow of streetlights or the familiar hum of my car's engine that I saw. Instead, I was enveloped in an abyss so dark, it felt like it was swallowing me whole. The kind of dark that doesn't just cover your eyes, but wraps itself around your soul, squeezing out every ounce of warmth. I tried to move, but my body felt weightless, disconnected from the world around me. I couldn't tell if I was standing, floating, or if I was anywhere at all. The space around me was vast, endless, a place where time didn't seem to exist. There was no sound, no warmth, just a cold, unrelenting stillness. And yet, it felt wrong, like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. It wasn't long before I noticed something. In the distance, there were faint, flickering lights, like stars that had long since lost their luster. I thought I should move towards them, but there was something in my gut that told me I shouldn't. But the curiosity, the overwhelming need to understand where I was, pushed me forward. As I walked, or more accurately, drifted, I saw shadows move along the edges of my vision. They were too swift to catch, but I could feel them watching me, following me. Fear began to settle in the pit of my stomach, and then, suddenly, I wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the darkness. I could barely make out its shape, but I knew it instantly. It was my mother. Her face, calm and serene, appeared before me like an apparition. I could see the familiar warmth in her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. But there was something different about her. Her presence was filled with an overwhelming sadness, a quiet sorrow that seemed to radiate from her very being. "Mom," I whispered, my voice trembling. Is this real?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a shred of comfort. Her touch, so familiar, calmed the raging storm inside me. But that comfort was short-lived. "Jessica," she said softly, her voice distant, almost hollow. "You shouldn't be here." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What's happening? Where am I?" She looked at me with deep, sorrowful eyes. "You're lost. You've been lost for so long." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Lost? How? I had always thought I was doing everything right. I had prayed, I had followed the teachings, and I had done my best to live a good life. So why was I here, in this place, with my mother of all people who had passed away years ago? "I don't understand," I stammered, trying to steady myself. "I've done everything I was supposed to do. I believed in God. I tried to be a good person." She didn't speak for a long time, her eyes drifting down as if the weight of the world was pressing on her. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Belief is not enough." The words echoed in my mind, reverberating with an intensity I couldn't comprehend. Not enough? How could she say that? My whole life had been built on my belief, but it felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, like everything I had known was slipping away. I took a step back, panic rising in my chest. "What do you mean? What else could I have done?" Her gaze softened, but there was a deep sadness that lingered in her eyes. "You've lived your life thinking that believing was enough, but you never truly lived it. You were too wrapped up in the world, in your own desires, in your fears. You didn't understand the weight of the choice you were making every day." Her words stung. They cut deep, like a wound I hadn't known existed. "I don't understand. I thought I was living a good life. I wasn't perfect, but I tried." "You tried," she repeated, "but trying isn't enough. Not when your heart was divided. Not when you allowed distractions, anger, and bitterness to cloud your path." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong. But her words settled in my chest like lead, heavy and undeniable. A part of me knew, deep down, that she was right. I had never fully surrendered my life. I had been holding back, clinging to parts of myself that didn't belong in the light. Before I could say another word, another figure appeared in the distance, walking toward us. This time, I recognized him instantly, my old pastor. He had been a fatherly figure in my life, a man I trusted, and yet here he was, standing before me with a look of quiet regret. "Pastor James," I whispered, a wave of grief washing over me. "What's happening?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze dropped, avoiding mine, as if he couldn't look me in the eye. "Jessica, you have to understand something," he began, his voice strained. "It's not enough to just say you believe. God isn't interested in lip service. He's looking for a heart that is surrendered, a life that reflects His truth in everything you do. The way you live, the choices you make, they matter." My throat tightened. "But I tried. I believed." "You believed," he repeated, "but you didn't live it. You didn't let the truth of it change you from the inside out." His words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. I had always believed, hadn't I? I had followed the rules, gone through the motions, and yet, here I was, standing in this dark place with nothing but regret and confusion surrounding me. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a distant, powerful voice that echoed through the emptiness, sending a shiver down my spine. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't Pastor James. It was something far greater. "You've only seen a sliver of truth," the voice boomed, resonating deep within my soul. "The path to eternal life is not a mere belief. It is a life fully transformed, a heart fully committed, and a spirit surrendered to the will of God." I felt a cold chill seep into my bones. Something was shifting, something I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just a vision, this was real. What I was learning here, it wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who claimed to follow Christ. As I stood there, I began to understand. My faith had been incomplete. My life had been a reflection of my own selfishness, not the pure devotion I had convinced myself it was. And as the realization hit me, I felt an overwhelming wave of fear, because I knew now with terrifying certainty that so many others were just like me. How many of us were truly living in the way that Christ had intended? How many of us were really following his path, rather than merely wearing his name as a badge? The tension mounted, and in that moment, I knew. What I had been taught, what I had always believed, was not enough to get me into heaven. As I stood there, my mind reeling from the weight of everything I'd learned, the air around me seemed to shift. It felt like the very fabric of the darkness was trembling, as if it couldn't hold what was about to happen. Then, out of the swirling void, a light began to break through. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft, warm, and steady. A presence filled the space, one that I instinctively knew could only belong to Jesus. He appeared before me, not as the distant figure I had always imagined, but as something deeply personal, someone who knew me, who had walked beside me all my life, even when I hadn't truly acknowledged his presence. His eyes, deep and knowing, pierced through the walls I had built around my heart. They were filled with love, but also with sorrow. "Jessica," he said, his voice soft yet powerful, "I have come to show you the truth." His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. The weight of them crushed me, yet there was a peace within them, a peace I hadn't felt in years. I wanted to fall at his feet, to beg for mercy, but something in me knew I had to listen. He was revealing something to me, something I had to understand. "I know you have questions," he continued, his gaze never leaving mine. "I know the doubts that have plagued your heart, the fears you've carried for so long. But what I need you to understand, what I need you to see, is why so many who claim to follow me will not make it to the kingdom." The words hit me like a tidal wave. I felt a knot tighten in my chest, as if I had been holding my breath for too long. "What do you mean, Lord?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've believed. I've tried. Why isn't that enough?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, and I could feel the weight of his presence, like a blanket of comfort and conviction wrapped around me. "Belief," he said quietly, "is not enough. Belief must be lived. It must be more than words or thoughts. It must be a transformation that changes the very fabric of your being." I felt as though I was drowning in his words, each one sinking deep into the core of my soul. "What do you mean, transformation?" I whispered. "I tried to follow you. I went to church. I prayed. I believed." Jesus looked at me with such compassion, but there was an edge to his gaze that I couldn't ignore. It was the look of someone who had seen through the facade I had so carefully constructed for myself. "You believed in me," he said, his voice tinged with sadness. "But you didn't live in me. You didn't surrender yourself fully. You allowed the world's distractions, your fears, your anger, your pride to cloud your vision." I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but his words held such weight. They rang with a truth I couldn't deny. The pieces began to fall into place, but the revelation was too overwhelming. "But how many of us are truly living this way?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How many Christians are really living according to your will?" Jesus' expression softened, and he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "That is why I have come to show you the truth that very few are living as they should. Only 3% of Christians, Jessica, only 3% of those who call my name, are truly living in the way I have called them to live." I could hardly breathe as the words settled in my mind. 3%? It seemed impossible. 3% of all the millions of people who claim to follow Christ, who say they believe, would actually make it to heaven? It was a number so small, so devastating that it felt like a crushing blow to everything I had known. Why? I gasped, struggling to understand. Why are so few able to live the way you've called us? What are we missing? Jesus looked at me, his gaze piercing through the depths of my soul. The reason so few will make it, he said slowly, is because belief without transformation is nothing more than a lie. Many people go through the motions, they say the words, but they never let me change their hearts. They never allow me to mold them into who I have called them to be. Tears welled up in my eyes, the weight of his words pressing against my chest, threatening to suffocate me. How could so many be deceived? How could I have been deceived? I had always believed, hadn't I? But now, in the light of this revelation, I realized how shallow my faith had been, how much of it had been about what I could get from God, rather than about what I was willing to give to Him. How often had I put my own desires before His will? There's more, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. Those who truly follow me, those who have allowed my love to transform them, are those who seek not their own gain, but the gain of others. They live in humility, they serve without pride, and they follow my example of sacrificial love. They seek to do the will of the Father in everything. I was trembling now, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. But what about the rest of us? I whispered. What about all those who truly think they believe but are still lost? Jesus looked at me with a deep, knowing sorrow. Many will come to me on that day and say, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name? But I will say to them, Depart from me. I never knew you. His voice cracked as he spoke, the sorrow in his eyes mirroring the pain in his words. That is the truth I am showing you. It is not enough to say you follow me. You must live the truth of my love. You must let my love transform you in every aspect of your life. The gravity of the moment was suffocating. I had no words. How had I missed this? How had I lived a life that was so far removed from the true heart of God? I had followed the rules. I had done what I thought was right. But it had never been enough. Jesus continued, Only those who are willing to lay down their lives for others, to love as I have loved, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And this is why only 3% of Christians make it. I could feel my heart breaking, the weight of the truth crashing down on me. The path to salvation wasn't about rules. It wasn't about appearances. It was about a deep, intimate relationship with God, a surrender of my life, my will, my heart to Him. And it terrified me. Jesus, I whispered, my voice barely audible. How can I change? How can I become one of those few? He looked at me, his gaze full of love and mercy. You must start by surrendering your heart to me. Stop living for yourself. Start living for others. Start living for me. It felt impossible. The weight of his words, the enormity of the change that would be required, was almost too much to bear. But I knew, deep down, that this was the moment of decision. This was the moment that could change everything. I was standing on the edge of something profound, and I was being asked to choose. The heaviness of Jesus' words hung in the air, suffocating me with the weight of truth. I felt the gravity of the decision before me, but I was frozen in place. How could I, a flawed, imperfect human, possibly live up to such a call? Could I truly surrender everything, every part of my being to follow Him the way He had shown me? Jesus stood before me waiting, His gaze unwavering, filled with both love and expectation. I felt the tension between us, the silent invitation for me to make a choice. But the road ahead seemed so uncertain. How would I change? Where would I even begin? Jessica, he said softly, almost as if reading my mind, the transformation begins with surrender. You must let go of the false beliefs, the pride, the fear that holds you back. You must let go of the world and trust in my love. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to absorb the enormity of what he was asking. I had spent my life holding on to things that, in the grand scheme of eternity, didn't matter. I had sought approval, validation, control, things that had kept me trapped in cycles of disappointment and disillusionment. But what Jesus was offering, what he was showing me, was a love that could break those chains, a love that didn't ask for perfection, only for a willing heart. "But how?" I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. "How do I let go of everything I've held on to for so long?" Jesus' expression softened, a mixture of understanding and compassion. "You don't do it alone, Jessica. That's the beauty of it. I am here to help you. You have only to ask, and I will help you. But you must first open your heart to my grace." In that moment, I felt the stirring of something deep within me, something I hadn't realized was there. It was the smallest flicker, a glimmer of hope, the first crack in the armor I had built around myself. And with that glimmer, I realized something crucial. I had been so focused on what I had to do to deserve God's love that I hadn't stopped to realize that his love was already here. It was already enough. The tears came then, tears of relief, of shame, of longing. I wanted to fall to my knees, to beg for forgiveness, but I was too overcome to move. I felt the weight of everything I had ever done wrong, the mistakes, the selfishness, the pride, and I couldn't bear it. Yet, in the same breath, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The quiet whisper of peace, the quiet whisper of forgiveness. Jesus stepped forward, his hand gently resting on my shoulder, and for a moment, I felt as though everything else in the world had faded away. It was just him and me, and in that space, there was no judgment, no condemnation, only the offer of grace. "Do you want to change, Jessica?" His voice was soft, but the question hit me with a force I hadn't expected. "Do you want to be free from the lies, the fear, the brokenness that has held you captive?" I nodded, my heart raw, my soul yearning for the freedom he offered. "Yes, Jesus," I said, my voice shaking. "I want to change. I want to be who you've called me to be." And with those words, something began to shift within me. The light that surrounded him seemed to grow brighter, filling the space, filling my heart, and for the first time, I felt a warmth that wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, deep within my very being. I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to let go of everything that had kept me in chains. But it wasn't just about me. It was about the world around me, the people I had failed to love, the ones who needed the grace I had so often withheld from them. "You are not alone in this journey," Jesus continued, his voice full of compassion. "And neither are the 3% of Christians who will truly make it. They are the ones who have allowed my love to overflow into the lives of others. They are the ones who live not for themselves, but for me. They are the ones who have surrendered fully to my will and my way." His words echoed in my mind. The truth he was revealing wasn't just about a future reality. It was about now. It was about a life of purpose, a life where love and service were the driving forces. And the choice, ultimately, was mine. As I stood before Jesus, the realization hit me like a tidal wave. The path to heaven wasn't a simple matter of believing. It was about living out that belief every single day. It was about loving others the way Jesus had loved me, sacrificially and unconditionally. It was about surrendering my will to his and trusting that, through him, I could become the person I was meant to be. But the road would be difficult. The temptations would still be there. The distractions of life still clamoring for my attention. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt a deep sense of peace that came from knowing I wasn't alone in the struggle. I had Jesus beside me, walking with me, guiding me every step of the way. "Go, Jessica," he said softly, his voice filled with both love and authority. "Live the truth of my love, share it with others, and you will see my kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. But remember this, It is not the words you speak, but the actions you take that will reveal the truth of who you are. As his words echoed in my heart, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that I had never known before. The path ahead would be challenging, but I knew I was no longer walking it alone. With every step I took, I would carry his love, his truth, and his grace into the world, sharing it with everyone I met. And as I stood in the light of his presence, I knew one thing for certain: the transformation had already begun. And with it, my journey toward becoming the person I was always meant to be. I don't remember the exact moment I returned to my body. One moment, I was standing before Jesus, my soul laid bare in the light of his truth. And the next, I was lying in a sterile hospital room, the sharp scent of antiseptic in the air, the faint beeping of machines grounding me back to reality. My eyes fluttered open, disoriented, but my heart was no longer the same. The weight of everything I had witnessed, the truth of why only 3% of Christians truly make it to heaven, was still with me, as if a part of it had been etched into my very soul. The revelation had shattered everything I thought I knew about faith. I had seen firsthand the stark reality of how shallow many of our beliefs truly are, how easy it is to live a life claiming Christ while failing to live out his love. But the peace I felt, despite the disorientation of the moment, was undeniable. I knew with every fiber of my being that my life had been forever transformed. I had witnessed the truth, and now it was my mission to share it. The challenges were immense. Reconciliating the person I had been with the one I was becoming felt like a constant battle. How could I continue living in the same way when I had seen the truth so clearly? How could I share this revelation with the people I loved without sounding like a lunatic or a zealot? But deep down, I knew there was no turning back. Sharing this truth, this life-altering understanding of Christ's love, has become my life's mission. I can no longer sit idly by, pretending that the world doesn't need this message. I will share what I have learned with everyone I meet, not through words alone, but through actions that reflect the love and grace I've received. My heart now burns with a desire to live fully in his love, and to show others how to live in that same truth.